Ever wonder what the NCIS LA team might do on a Star Trek starship? If so, then stick around. Hey Trekkies, welcome back to another episode of Yelling About Star Trek. My name is Christian Fox, and this is the show where I yell at you about all things Star Trek for your amusement. Today, I want to do something a little bit different and talk about another franchise that I love, and that of course is the NCIS franchise, and more specifically NCIS LA. For those of you who don't know much about NCIS, NCIS stands for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and basically they're just a federal law enforcement agency that deals with any sort of Navy-related crime. So if there's a crime that happens and it involves a naval element, then the NCIS team are the ones that are sent in to figure out what the heck is going on and to serve some sweet, sweet justice. But you might be wondering why I'm talking about this on a Star Trek channel because, well, NCIS doesn't really have much to do with Star Trek. And you'd be right. NCIS doesn't have a lot to do with Star Trek, but there are two things that make it very similar. One, because it's about Navy crime, it has a naval element, much like Star Trek. The second thing is that it's also a CBS show. So if you're a former Star Trek actor, then chances are pretty high that you would be either a guest star in NCIS, be a director in NCIS, or in the case of Scott Bakula, actually lead a series. But beyond those two things, there is one reason that I'm talking about NCIS LA here today. So for the last couple of weeks, I've been binging the series. I've actually watched it on and off for a long time, but never really started it from the beginning. So I thought, you know what, it's probably time. It's on Paramount Plus. I have it. I might as well go through and see NCIS LA from the beginning. And when watching those episodes, I was intrigued with the character Hetty Lang, played brilliantly by Linda Hunt. And I should point out that I'm not just noticing this character for the first time. She has appeared in a lot of episodes that I've seen because she's a regular character, but I don't know why I never vocalized it before, but for some reason I was watching an episode and she had a line of dialogue or said something, I can't remember what it was, and I thought to myself, wow, she would make a perfect captain. And I was thinking to myself, man, CBS really has to hire Linda Hunt as a captain if they are, in fact, doing another Star Trek series and they need a captain. So CBS, if you're watching this video for some strange reason, then please cast Linda Hunt as a captain. And if you do that, please do not make her evil, okay? Just have her be a good, reliable captain that everybody can count on, that gets the job done, and does everything we expect a captain to do, because that's what she does on the show. And just to clarify, her role on the show is operational manager, so she's the one in charge of everything and tells the characters what to do, approves operations, and just makes sure that everybody is following the rules and that they're getting the job done appropriately. So in a lot of ways, she is like the captain. And because it's me and it's what I do, I went down the rabbit hole and started thinking to myself, well, if Hetty would make a good captain, what would the other characters do on a starship? So that is the question I'm going to answer here today. For this experiment, I've decided to use the typical positions that we've seen on the series with some mixing and matching just to allow for all characters to have an appropriate position. These are Captain, First Officer, Science Officer, Chief of Security, Chief Engineer, Chief Medical Officer, Ship's Counselor, Helmsman, and Navigator. The first position that we need is Captain, and that is really easy. It's Hetty. Hetty's the captain. There's really nothing to say much about that. She's the reason I decided to do this whole video, and I think she has all the qualities of a good captain. She's very trustworthy. The team knows that she's someone that can be counted on, but she's also a little bit intimidating, so she does keep the characters on edge, but not in a mean way, but kind of like, oh, you know what? I want to make sure that Hetty doesn't see me goofing off because I don't want to upset Hetty. So, I mean, I think that is a good quality. You don't want characters to become too relaxed on a starship. So I think Hetty is the perfect choice for captain. Now that we have our captain, we need to think about the first officer because, of course, a captain is only as good as their first officer. So for this, I initially picked Callen. I thought Callen was the obvious choice because in the show, he actually is the head of the team. He's one level below Hetty. Hetty makes all the operational decisions, but Callen is the one to make more of the day-to-day decisions and tells everybody where they should be going. So I thought, yeah, Callen's the easy choice. He makes the most sense, and he's the lead character in the show. So naturally, it makes the most sense. But then it was pointed out to me that Nell actually makes a better first officer because there's lots of times when Hetty is not around where Nell will kind of take charge and tell people what they need to do and run everything much like a first officer would do in the absence of a captain. So Nell actually makes the most sense for a first officer. And now that we have our captain and first officer, we need to think about the science officer. And the show itself isn't super like sciencey, I would say. They do get into, DNA and fibers and all of the, usual crime scene stuff, but it doesn't seem to go overboard with it like, say, NCIS regular or NCIS New Orleans, just because of the nature of their work doesn't involve as much science as the other shows do. So there's not really a clear sciencey character, but for this position, I would pick Eric because he is the sort of the guy behind the screen character. He's the one who is hacking into databases, is pulling up camera feeds, he's getting some DNA when DNA is needed, and he is really the one to go through all the evidence to say, okay, here's what I've looked at. Based on this evidence, we can make these assumptions. So this is what you're looking for, guys. Yada, yada, yada. Go do this thing. Again, Nell would have been a good science officer because she does a lot of what Eric is doing, but because she's the first officer, it makes more sense for Eric to be the science officer. The next position that we need to think about is Chief of Security, and that is obviously Sam Hanna. Sam Hanna is the perfect person for the job. He has a lot of intense combat training. He's very muscular, so when he walks onto a scene, people are like, okay, all right, don't shoot. All right, don't beat me up. Like, I will comply. So I feel like if, bad guys were to invade the starship, you see Sam show up with the security team and people are like, oh, okay, all right. Can you just beam me out of here? I don't want to try and take over the ship now. I'm good. So I feel like he has the physicality to be a security officer. And let me tell you, nobody busts through a door pointing a gun quite like Sam. Obviously, I have a picture up right now so you can see a little bit of his pose, but you really don't get the full sense of it unless you see it in action. So I'd highly recommend that after this video, you try and find a clip of Sam busting through a door pointing his gun, because it is a sight to behold and just shows me that, okay, give this guy a phaser and he can make it look like a serious weapon, because I love phasers. I think they're so Star Trek. They don't look super intimidating, at least the way characters hold them. And I'm talking about specifically the TNG phaser, the handheld one, not so much the gun phaser, which is not a great way of describing it. But characters, when they hold the phaser, don't look that intimidating. But I feel like with Sam's physicality and the way he busts through doors, holding a phaser, he could look really, really good. So that makes the most sense. But I also do want to say that all the other characters would be great security officers because they're all law enforcement. So naturally, they had the skills that you would need to be a security officer. But Sam, I think, is the clear choice. And next on our list is Chief Engineer. And the Chief Engineer position was a little bit challenging to fill just because no one on the show is really an engineer, in the sense that they're always fixing things. Because, well, they're law enforcement, so they don't really need that engineering skill set. But I picked Kensi because Kensi on the show has mentioned several times that her dad was really into cars, so she learned a lot from her dad when she was growing up, and she's seen working on cars throughout the series, and usually seems to know what people are talking about when a car is brought up and there's something weird going on with the engine that, relates to a plot point. So she's really good with cars, and I think it translates one-to-one pretty well with a chief engineer. So I can imagine that Kensi, if she were in Star Trek, would be someone that hung around warp cores all the time and ships, did that whole thing. So I think Kensi as chief engineer would be fantastic. I think, again, she would make a great security officer, or chief of security rather, because she is law enforcement and she is definitely one of the most badass people on the show, even though they're all badasses. But again, Sam is the best choice for that. And so I think Kensi as chief engineer, I think works out perfectly. The next two positions that we need to fill are Chief Medical Officer and Ship's Counselor. And I'm talking about both of them in the same section because I actually want to put the same person for both roles. So for Chief Medical Officer, it is a little bit challenging. If I was talking about the original NCIS or NCIS New Orleans, I would just pick the medical examiner character because that would translate 1-to-1, because both of those shows have that character who is the medical examiner who looks at all the bodies and figures out how someone was killed and, conveys a lot of useful forensics information to the team so they can figure out what the heck is going on. But strangely enough, NCIS LA doesn't really have a coroner. So that means we're just left with Nate, who is the team psychologist. He's the one that makes a lot of insights about what characters are doing and why they're behaving in a certain way and relays a lot of useful information. So I think naturally, because he's already sort of a doctor, and I mean, yes, he is a doctor because he's a psychologist, but when I say sort of a doctor, I mean sort of a medical doctor in a sense, but he's not a full doctor. But I think with the right training, he could actually be a full-on doctor. So I'm just in this fictional world, I'm going to make him Chief Medical Officer. And as I said, he's the psychologist on the show, and he's the one who usually offers really unique and helpful insights into character motivations so that the team can figure out why suspects might be behaving the way they're behaving. And so naturally, he's the perfect choice for Ship's Counselor based on that. Now, the thing that I find frustrating about Nate's character is that he actually does what Counselor Troy should have been doing on TNG so well that it makes Troy look kind of like a bad character, and Nate himself is not even telepathic or empathic. So the fact that he can do Troy's job better than Troy is kind of frustrating, and the fact that the writers on NCIS seem to know what to do with him better than the writers on TNG seem to know what to do with Troy. So that's a little bit frustrating. It's a bit of a rant, doesn't matter, but either way, it means that Nate is the perfect person for the Ship Counselor role. And I know Ship's Counselor and Chief Medical Officer is a lot for one person to take on, but I imagine in a crisis situation, they'd call up Nate to the bridge, he would give his insight, and then his medical staff would be down in sick bay treating people if they needed to be. But people on TNG don't seem to get injured too much when it's not sci-fi related, so I don't think there'd be a lot of medical stuff for him to do day to day. At least that's what I imagine. I could be totally wrong. But, in cases when there is a medical mystery, they can just say, okay, Nate, can you get back down to sick bay? Thank you for the insight. Now, can you figure out what happened to this person in the transporter? And then he'd go off and do that. So I think realistically, he could do both positions, even though it is quite a bit. So the final two positions that we have are the Houseman and Navigator. For Houseman, I would pick Marty Deeks. Marty has a lot of skills on the show. He's an undercover agent. He obviously has all the combat training that you would need as a law enforcement person. He actually works for the LABT in the show. So he has all the skills that you would need to be an officer in a law enforcement situation. But beyond that, he doesn't have a lot of skills that I think would be useful in a Star Trek situation. So because of that, I think it makes sense to be the helmsman. It's a little bit frustrating. I'd like to have Deeks in a better position. Not that helmsman isn't a good position, but I'd like him to be doing more on the ship. But I really can't see where he would fit that would be uniquely suited to his skills. So make him helmsman. And I don't want to say that the helmsman doesn't do anything. They do a lot, but it's not really related to what Deeks does in the show. So it's not a great fit, but it's what we have to do. And finally, we have Navigator. And that's where I want to put Callen. I think Callen is probably the best choice for Navigator. I would have liked to put him in another position that is more unique to his skill set, but I think Navigator is appropriate given the fact that he's not the first officer. But like Sulu, I would put him as the second officer, meaning that if Hetty and Nell were off the ship, then it would be Callen that would be calling the shot. So I think that works. It still gives Callen some seniority, even though he's not where I'd like him to be. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on what I think the LA team might do if they are on a Star Trek starship. But what do you think? Do you agree with my choices? Did I make some bad calls? Are there some other series you want me to do this with? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And as usual, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of my videos, because I do try to post them every week and new ones will be coming at you very quickly. And in the paraphrased words of Captain Kirk, I shall see you out there. That away.